The people of Calloglass had a name for the ridge above their town, and it was not a kind one. They called it Marin's Haunt, as though she were a ghost and not a woman, and they taught their young ones to look away when the wind moved through the pines up there. No one had climbed to the top in living memory. No one had tried. Oswindrast was 62 years old, and he had stopped being afraid of things he could not prove were dangerous. He had made glass all his life. He knew that the clearest glass came from the finest sand, and the finest sand in Callow Valley lay along the stream bed at the top of that ridge, exactly where the orc woman had lived for 20 years. He had ignored the fact for a long time. But that October morning he looked at his dwindling stock, looked up at the ridge, and decided that the worst she could do was send him back down. He packed a loaf of bread and a wedge of hard cheese in his coat pocket, because it was a long climb and he was 62, and he started up. The path was old and nearly swallowed by the grass. He noticed small things as he climbed, the stream running clear and fast, its banks free of the deadfall that choked the lower sections every spring. A row of flat stones laid across the muddiest stretch of trail, not stacked by accident, set by hand, deliberately, to keep a person's feet dry. Someone had been maintaining this path for years, even though no one used it. He was breathing hard by the time the cabin came into view. It was a modest place, stone-walled, with a good roof and a garden at its side that was still green in October, sheltered by a windbreak of young birches. There was a bench by the door, worn smooth. A pair of heavy work gloves hung on a peg. The orc woman was in the garden. She was larger than him by a head, broad-shouldered, her green skin dark as old copper in the morning light. Her hair was silver-black, braided back from her face, and she stood among her late-season herb rows with her hands at her sides, head tilted slightly, listening, he realized, to his footsteps on the path. She made no move to flee and no move to threaten. She simply turned to face the sound of him, and her eyes, which were pale and clouded as river ice, found a point just past his shoulder. "Oswindrast," she said. "The glassblower." He stopped walking. The bread and cheese sat heavy in his pocket. "I am," he said when he got his breath. "Though I haven't told you so." "You haven't." She said it without satisfaction or mystery, the way a person states a fact that pleases them for its simplicity. "You walk the same as your father did. A little heavier on the right. He used to bring his work orders to the miller on Fridays. I could hear him on the cobblestones below every week for 30 years. She paused. "I heard when he stopped coming. I'm sorry for it." Oswin stood very still. "You knew my father," he said. "I knew the sound of him," she said. "That's not quite the same. But it's not nothing either." She told him her name was Marin, which he already knew, and she invited him to sit on the bench while she brought water from the well. He sat. She moved through her garden without hesitation, her hands reading the tops of the herb stalks as she passed them, touching each one lightly, the way a person turns the pages of a book they know by heart. She returned with 2 cups and lowered herself to the bench beside him with the deliberate ease of someone who knows exactly where every surface is. He told her what he had come for. The river sand along her stream bed. He asked permission. She was quiet for a moment, listening to the wind in the birches. Then she said, "There is a better deposit 30 feet upstream from where you are thinking. The sand there is finer. Less iron in it. Your glass will come out cleaner." He looked at her. "How do you know which deposit I was thinking of?" "Because it is the one closest to the path," she said, "and men who have climbed a long way tend to stop at the first thing that looks right." She turned her face toward him, and though her eyes did not find his, the expression in them was warm. "The better sand is upstream. I'll show you, if you like." He thought afterward that the morning had passed strangely, not strangely in the way of discomfort, but strangely in the way of abundance, the way a man feels when he has found more than he came looking for. She showed him the deposit, guiding him along the stream bank with a hand not quite touching his elbow, describing the changes in the ground underfoot before his feet found them. She talked about the stream the way he talked about glass, with the particular love of someone who has given years of attention to a thing. She knew where it ran fastest, where it slowed and dropped its sediment, where the kingfishers nested in the overcut bank. She knew what the water level told her about the snowpack on the peaks above, and she knew it not by measuring but by listening to the pitch of the current at the bend below the cabin. He began to ask questions. She answered them without hurry, and somewhere in the answering he stopped thinking of her as a woman the valley feared and started thinking of her as a woman who had spent 20 years learning everything the valley had forgotten to notice. The mill race, he said, at one point, remembering a conversation he'd had with the miller the week before, a slow leak that Harwick the miller couldn't locate. Harwick thinks it's the left channel. He's been patching that side for 2 seasons. Marin shook her head. It's the right intake, she said. There's a crack in the stone at the first joint. I can hear the difference in the water sound when the autumn pressure drops. The leak is small, but it pulls sand into the channel every spring. In another 2 years it will be serious. She paused. Someone ought to tell him. You could have told him yourself, Oswin said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, no one has ever climbed the ridge to ask. He carried that sentence back down with him. It sat in his chest all the way through the pine trees and the lower meadow and the cobblestone lane of callow glass. It was still there when he set his pack down in his workshop and stood among his pots and pipes and thought about what it meant to know something for 20 years in silence because the knowing was never invited in. He went to Harwick that afternoon. He told him about the right intake and the crack at the first joint. Harwick dug it out the following morning and found the crack exactly as described, and stood for a long moment with the evidence in his hands before asking how Oswin had known. The woman on the ridge, Oswin said. Harwick looked at him. Marin, Oswin said. She heard it in the water sound. She's been hearing it for a while. He went back up on the second day to collect the first load of sand, and brought her a length of good wool cloth that she had not asked for and he had not planned to bring. She ran her fingers along it without speaking, then folded it carefully over her arm and thanked him in a voice that was lower and quieter than her ordinary one. On the third day, Harwick came with him. The miller was a large, cautious man who did not make decisions quickly, and he stood at the edge of her garden for a moment before she greeted him. She greeted him by name, and by the particular title he used when he signed the market ledger. He blinked. You know me, he said. I know your cart, she said. And the sound your left rear wheel makes when it needs greasing, which is most of the time. And I know the song you hum when you think no one's listening. It's an old fishing song from the eastern settlements. She paused. Your mother was from there, I think. Harwick sat down on the bench and did not get up for an hour. The schoolmaster came on the 5th day, because Harwick had told him and he had not believed it, and then could not stop thinking about it. His name was Bren, and he was 34, and he had lived in callow glass his whole life. He brought a question he had been carrying for years, a mathematical puzzle in the management of the valley's water rights, and he presented it to Marin the way a student presents a problem to a teacher, half hoping she would say it was beyond her. She turned it over in a few minutes of silence. The error is in how you've weighted the eastern tributary, she said. It runs higher in odd years by about a 1/6. If you account for that, the rights resolve cleanly. The old survey says even, but the old survey was done in a dry summer. She tilted her face slightly. The stream tells you, if you listen at the right time of year. Bren walked home slowly. He corrected the ledger that evening. He went back the following week and the week after. It was harder to track exactly when the others began to come. Oswin only noticed in retrospect, the way you notice a path has been worn into grass, not the moment it happened, but after, when the evidence is plain. The neighbors from the lower meadow farms. The woman from the dry goods store who had always looked away when she passed the base of the ridged trail. The old veteran who had lived in callow glass for 40 years and had always shaken his head at the mention of the ridge, and who came one afternoon and sat with Marin for 2 hours and left with his shoulders carried differently than before. They brought things. A pot of preserves. A repaired fence latch. A length of harness leather for her garden gate. She received each thing the same way, with a quiet attention, as though the gift were a person and deserved to be truly seen. She learned nothing new about any of them, because she already knew most of it. But they learned something they had not known, that they had been known, all along, by someone they had never bothered to meet. One evening in late October, Oswin sat on the bench while she made tea inside, and he listened to the valley below, the slow tick of the mill wheel, a dog somewhere, the sound of the evening bell from the market square. He was trying to hear it the way she heard it. He could not. 20 years of practice lived in her ears and in the stillness she had made around herself, and he had barely started. But he was starting. She came back with the tea and settled beside him, and for a while neither of them spoke. The light was going amber behind the peaks. Below, a curl of smoke rose from the schoolmaster's chimney, and from the miller's, and from his own workshop where he had banked the furnace for the night. "They were afraid of you," he said. "I know," she said. "Fear is loud. It carries a long way. They're not anymore." She was quiet for a moment, and he heard, or thought he heard, something shift in her breathing. Something that had been held for a long time, easing. "No," she said. "They're not." He looked down at the path, the one he had climbed on that first October morning, thinking he was the only one who ever had. It was different now. The grass had been pressed down by feet, not just his own. A dozen sets of footsteps had worn the trail a little cleaner, a little wider, and there was a smooth stone at the first muddy crossing that someone had set in better than before. "Someone fixed the stepping stone," he said. "Harwick," she said. "He came up Tuesday morning before first light. He didn't want me to hear him and make a thing of it." She turned her face toward Oswin, and the clouded pale eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with sight. "He didn't know that I heard him anyway." She said it with a gentleness that was not pride, and not sadness, only the tender exactness of a woman who had listened to this valley for 20 years from her ridge and loved every sound it made, even the frightened ones. Even the sounds of people who had not yet found the courage to walk toward her. Even the long quiet of the years before anyone had. Oswin drank his tea. Below, the evening bell rang its single note across the rooftops of callow glass, and Marin turned her face toward it, and smiled. He had heard that bell 1,000 times without truly listening to it. He listened now.